Hello students, welcome to data processing class once again. Today we are going to look at the basic unit of data in which a user can store information in a computer system or on a disk, and that is computer files. So we are going to look at computer files. Computer files. Alright, before now, you all know what file is. You have seen file naturally. The office flat file, the ones that are used in different offices to file documents. So in a computer system, we also have files. Now we are going to look at what these files are, or what a file is. Now, like I said, a file is the basic unit of data for storing information on a disk. Now we are going to look at some elements that make up this file. So we look at a file, we look at a record, we look at field, and we look at data. We look at file, record, field, and data. Now, what is a file? A file is a collection of related records. I repeat, a file is a collection of related records. Record is also a collection of related fields. I will use a simple table to illustrate. Then a field is also a portion in a record that contains a particular data. Or someone can say that a field is a collection of related data. Now let me use this table to illustrate so that you understand what I mean. I have this table here. This is a table. Now in database, when you have a table like this, this is a field, field 1, this is field 2, this is field 3, this is field 4. And remember that when you have a table like this, information or records will be contained in this table. Now, how do you determine what the file is there? How do you determine what the record is there? How do you determine the field and the data? Now, individual data items are entered in these cells. The whole of this table will give rise to the file. When stored on a disk is a file. Remember when you are working with Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel or any other application package you are working with. After entering your records and you want to save, the moment you click on save, the computer system will bring out a dialog box asking you to enter the file name. Because what you have just entered is a file you are going to store in a disk. You give the file name and you save it. So here now, this is the file. And when you enter information here, maybe here you enter name, student name. Maybe here you enter the address, class, date of birth, or any other thing you feel like. The whole of this line will now contain information about a particular student, let's say Emmanuel. If Emmanuel is the name here, every other thing written here will be particulars of Emmanuel. And from this place here to this place, we will now give you the record of that student called Emmanuel. Now, look at the columns here. The first column I tag field 1, where I have name, is the first field. This is the second field. This is the third field. Now, when you combine these fields together, the fields together, they will give rise to the record I earlier mentioned. On the other hand, the individual records, individual data items you have entered inside these cells will give rise to a particular field. For example, if I enter Emmanuel here, that becomes the data item there. Another thing here, maybe the address is Road 5 Low Cost Housing Estate. Another data item. And all of them collectively will give rise to the field. So you can now say that a file is a collection of related records. A record is a collection of related fields. And a field is a collection of related or collection of data items. And data in this context can be said to be the smallest unit of information that can be stored. Do you understand? Okay. Now, when you have computer files, there are classes of computer files. Computer files can be classified into some classes of computer files. Now you have the first one there is master file. Master file. Another is transaction file. Transaction file. Another one is reference file. Reference file. There is yet another file that is called scratch file, but in most cases is not mentioned, especially in books. But let me explain. A master file is a file with fairly amount of permanency. A file that is stored that has some amount of permanency. Let me give you an example. Some of you, your parents have shops where they sell some items. Some are working in offices. They keep records of the things they do there. Now, there are some files in that shop or in that office that will not be changed easily. For example, payroll or names of employees in an office or in a firm, or the things you sell in that shop. So because of this, the files that will contain such information is called master file. But this master file can be updated using another file called transaction file. A transaction file is a file that is created as a result of day-to-day transactions that go on in an office or in a shop. For example, if I have a shop where I sell some items and I have a place where I record the things I do there every day. If I encounter anything in a shop that day or I sell any item, I will record it. anything I do in an office, I'll record it. These are transactions. Are you following? These are transactions. So any file that will arise because of transactions that go on in an office or in a firm from day to day is called transaction file. It's called what? Transaction file. Now, sometimes this transaction file can be used to update the master file. Are you following? Alright. Now, another type of file is reference file. Reference file. A reference file is a file that also has certain amount of permanency, but it is not like master file. In this case now, the reference file is there for reference purposes, where a teacher in a school can have a reference to, or somebody in a shop selling items can make reference to, or in an office can make reference to. That is the purpose of such files. Such files are kept for reference purposes. Then the other file that I mentioned, scratch file. Scratch file. This is a file that is no longer needed. A file that is no longer needed in an organization, in a firm, or in a shop, or in an office is tagged scratch file. And such file will be due for disposal. So that is for classes of file. Okay, now I will now take you to types of file organization. File organization. Remember, this is classes of computer files. Now we are now going to look at the way these computer files are being organized, are being stored in storage devices. So we are going to look at types of file organization. So we are looking at file organization. Now, what is file organization? This is simply the method, the manner in which files are being stored on a disk. Are you following? Disk, I mean here, it could be hard disk, it could be CD-ROM, is a disk, it could be any other storage device. So the method in which these files are being stored is what we call file organization. Now, the types of file organization we have here, we have serial file organization, serial, we have sequential, we have random, we have indexed. These are the ones we are going to discuss. Serial file organization, sequential file organization, random file organization, and index file organization. Now, what is serial file organization? Somebody might be wondering if serial and sequential are not the same. In this context, they are not. Now, serial file organization is simply a method of organizing computer files or storing computer files in chronological order. What do I mean by chronological order? Storing files in the order in which they arrive. For example, if file A arrives first, it will be stored first. Not considering any other thing. You just consider that the file arrived first. For example, in a classroom, we can decide that the way you are going to sit in this class will be that any student that comes in first will sit first. You see, we are not considering any other thing. We are just considering the method, the time you arrive in chronological order. So files that are stored in that order are called, that method is called serial file organization. Then sequential file organization is stored serially but following a defined or fixed record, fixed order. There is a particular order in which such files can be stored. For example, we can say that, remember that we are talking about storage on a disk. Now, assuming we are storing files that are 10 kilobytes in a space or a block, there is no way that you will now bring in a file that is above 10 kilobytes to store there, because the fixed order that we are following cannot accommodate such file. So we have defined the order in which files they are going to be stored. So in that case now, there is a sequential order in which such file can be stored. So that is sequential file organization. So the difference there is that in serial file organization, the files are just stored following a chronological order. But in sequential file, there must be a fixed order in which such files can be stored. Now we have another file here that is called random file organization. In random file organization, even though the files have index numbers, but the files are stored randomly, not following a particular order here. Just as the name is, random. Any available space on the disk can accommodate the file. Now the next one is index file organization. Here, the files are given index numbers. So the files are stored based on this index number. Assuming we have, let me use the classroom as an example again. If we say that every student here will have a number 1, number 2, number 3, as the case may be, and we say that number 1 must sit here and number 10 must sit there. So if you are coming without that tag, number 1, this seat will not be for you. You will not go there because the index number that will serve as a reference number is not assigned to you. Are you following? So based on that, index file organization is done using reference numbers. Let me give you an example. In a school like this, each student has registration number. And no two students can have the same registration number, you know that. So if we want to store information concerning our students here, we use the registration number which will serve as your reference numbers. So if we are now storing files concerning you or records about any student, we will do that using that number which serves as reference number. So in index file organization, the files are stored using reference numbers. Okay? Alright. Now remember, so far we have said that a file is a collection of related records, a record collection of related fields, a field collection of related data item, and data item the smallest unit of information that can be stored. We have looked at classes of computer file. We have mentioned the master file, and we said master file is a computer file with a reasonable amount of permanency. And master file can be updated using transaction file. And we now say that transaction file is a file that is generated as a result of day-to-day transaction in an office or in a firm. And we also said, we talked about reference file, a file that is kept for reference purposes. We also talked about scratch file, a file that is no longer needed. And now we said file organization is simply the method in which computer files are being stored on a disk. Types of file organization, we have mentioned serial file organization, we have mentioned sequential file organization, we have mentioned random file organization, and indexed file organization. Now, there are certain criteria to be considered before choosing a file organization, a method of file organization. What are these criteria? One of the criteria is that you have to consider the nature of the file. You consider the nature of the file. You also consider the disk where you are going to store the file. For example, if you want to store a sequential file, and you know that sequential file can only be stored sequentially, all you need to do is to look for a sequential storage device that will enable you do it that way. I hope you can remember a device that is sequential storage device. You know the tape and all that. The tape is a good example. Now, when you consider these things, you also consider the volume of file that you are storing. I want you to go through what we've done so far. I also want to let you know that having organized your file, there are also ways of accessing computer files. Because when you store file, you are storing it because you access it later. Method of accessing computer files. Computer files can be accessed sequentially. Computer files can be accessed randomly. And I also want to mention here that when we talk about random here, it can also be called direct file organization. So it can also be accessed randomly or directly. It can also be accessed using the reference number, that is the index number. So far, I will want you to, on your own, that is the exercise you are going to do for me, you compare the methods of accessing computer files. Compare the methods of accessing computer files, noting the difference or differences between sequential file assessment, noting the difference between random file assessment and index file assessment. Now also, you write down the storage devices that can allow serial file organization, sequential file organization, random file organization, and index file organization. Write 2 storage devices that can allow this kind of file organization each. Okay? Now, so far, having looked at what a file is, what a record is, what a field is, what data item is, types of file organization, types of or classes of file, and methods of accessing computer files. I would want to stop here so far, waiting for your response on the methods of accessing files. Remember, I said you should look at the 3. After that, you note the differences. As well, you write down the storage devices that can allow this kind of file organization. Thank you, and God bless you.